so much of the world we're in now is how are you going to be relational? How are you going to build friends? How are you going to build community? I mean, we are like beyond a precipice of this.
Welcome to The Reframe, where we have real, unfiltered conversations about mental health, parenting, and addiction treatment in a changing world. Hosted by Douglas Bowden, a therapeutic consultant with 35 years of experience, we explore the shifts shaping mental health care, featuring experts pioneering new approaches and offering practical advice. Join us as we challenge old narratives and reframe the way we think about the challenges in mental health treatment. This is The Reframe. Let's dive in.
Today we're joined by Alex Zemeckis, who's the owner and founder of the Grounds Recovery and Mare's House in San Diego. For over a decade, Alex has worked in the addiction treatment and mental health communities, helping young adults find ways to live a vibrant, healthy, sober lifestyle. Alex has a Bachelor of Arts degree from San Diego State University and a master's degree in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica. Alex, welcome to The Reframe.
Doug, thank you so much for having me, man. I'm so glad we're finally making this happen. It feels surreal to me. I must say, this is my second podcast this week, which is just to kind of put this in perspective, how out of the norm that is. I told my wife, I was like, I have 2 podcasts this week. And she goes, what? I was like, yeah. She's like, you need to go to Toastmasters tonight. And I literally found a Toastmasters down the street. Happened to be one at the La Jolla Rec Center from 6:30 to 8. And I went and it was great. And I think I'm going to keep going. So hopefully not a whole lot of ands, ums, and knows, right?
That's good. So I'd like some tips too. And I don't know how we mixed some joke in there about Toastmasters and recovery, but we'll figure that out in post-production.
I think it's apples and oranges, but you know what?
All right.
It's funny. There's Toastmasters and then there's a 12-step meeting next door. And I was like, wait, right. Which one do I go to here? So, but it was cool. I think, I'll keep going and I'll keep you posted. But yeah, thanks so much for having me, Doug. And I really look forward to this discussion. And yeah, so
we met a long time ago, and you were new, not in the industry, but just having opened the grounds. And I'd like to just hear a little bit about your story, how you came to that. I think it's important and relevant for who you are, and I think it's also representative of what the state of the art is in recovery transitional programs as well. So I think hearing a little bit about that would be great.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to sort of qualify with some background. So yes, I would say my story as a young adult, adolescent, was definitely unique. I grew up in Santa Barbara, definitely privileged, Hollywood background, very loving parents. They had their own curriculum and the stuff they were working through. But, I was actually born in LA, and then we moved to Santa Barbara during the riots, and it was just kind of their plan to move up there, and that was kind of a good time to go. And so I definitely consider myself from Santa Barbara. But yeah, it was definitely, I was an only child, and my parents were very active in their careers. And I just, from a very young age, just really needed to fit in. And I had this yearning to fit in. And I think there was just that hole, that void that we hear a lot. And I definitely had that. So
how did that play out? You just give a sense of,
well, the first time I can really remember this, just where I was aware of this void, right? And this grave separation. I think I became the most aware of this when I was probably in the 3rd or 4th grade, and airwalk shoes were like the thing, right? It was like these were the beginning of skating shoes, and street skateboarding was really taking off. And I just remember thinking, like, one of my peers came to school and he had the newest, coolest airwalks, and he got so much prize and praise for having these shoes, and there was so much attention that he got. And I just remember thinking, like, man, I need that. I need that from those peers. I'm not okay unless I have that. And I don't know if if you call it insecurity or whatever it was, but that was sort of the feeling of like, man, I need those airwalks to feel a part of. And it's important that I know that, right? Because I think just in all the interpersonal work I've done over the years, you have to really figure out, okay, where did this start? And what was kind of the root of this? So yeah, so like I said, I mean, I grew up in a loving family. They separated, they divorced, they had their own stuff going on. Not a whole lot, no siblings to kind of bounce anything back off of. So it was kind of an interesting, I definitely felt like a sail in the wind, kind of trying to navigate things. And, but moving forward, I then started skateboarding and surfing, and then I discovered marijuana at age 13, right? And the first time I smoked weed was like, a warm hug from God, right? It was this feeling of, oh man, I have arrived. And I chased that feeling to the bitter end. It's like, yeah, where have you been? And so that very quickly perpetuated a lot of problems. And I went to wilderness treatment for the first time at the age of 14. And I went to Sousa, the Carolinas, which no longer exists. And from there, I went to a therapeutic boarding school and was able to manipulate my parents into pulling me out during the admission process, which
during admission,
very skilled to this day. Yeah. As somebody who now works on the other side of the curtain, I just can't believe that all went the way it did. But then I went back to Santa Barbara and immediately was just a truant, not going to class, getting loaded every day. I just burned it to the ground. And then so I went to a program again, a residential treatment center for adolescents.
Well, I got to stop you.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you manipulated your way out of going to therapeutic boarding school upon admission. Just general sense of your skill set.
Sure. Well, when you're an only child and you have parents that are in the midst of a separation, a divorce, and you're a black belt at manipulating, both of them, both sides against the middle, you can be kind of artistic at getting what you want, right? And I think my mom felt this shame, or she felt that she was going to lose me and our relationship if I went to this program. How I perceive it is she was going to lose me if I went into this program, and my dad was just trying to do the right thing and listen to the professionals, right? But she could not be on his side. So it was this like divorce dynamic in the admission office of this program. It's funny, there's a colleague that is still in the field today, and we work together and we still talk about this experience. And it's amazing because he was there. And, he even says this day, I've still never seen anything like that. That was insane. I mean, money on the table, ready to enroll. I'm a perfect fit for this program. And I activate my parents together and boom, I'm ejected. It's exactly what I wanted. It was like the golden ticket, man.
We'll get to it later, I'm sure. But I'm guessing that experience of yours impacts how you navigate your work there at the grounds.
For sure. I mean, all of this takes one to know one. And I definitely bring in a lot of the personal experience, but, so fast forward, I got what I wanted. I got to go back to Santa Barbara. And so I flamed out of there. And then, my parents officially divorced. And so it was this constant thing of who am I living with and where am I spending my time? And then, back to programs as an adolescent. So it was this constant back to Santa Barbara, back to a program, back to Santa Barbara. There were no like therapeutic there were therapeutic boarding schools, but there was no like sober high schools back then. There was not the level of resources that is available now, right? And so my parents, through the midst of their dysfunction, were trying to really navigate what was best for me. And it's so clear now. And so long story short, I went through these programs and I got into San Diego State, and it wasn't the college I wanted to go to. I actually wanted to go to CU Boulder, and I didn't get in. I had terrible grades. I had horrible SAT scores. I wrote this amazing letter about my recovery journey and going through all these programs and things, and San Diego State accepted me. And when I was there at San Diego State, it was just as unorthodox as everything else was. I mean, I'd have dudes with tattoos, sober companions living in the dorms with me. I mean, imagine like 6 suite mates at San Diego State, freshmen, and they see this guy with tattoos living with me, trying to keep me sober.
You had a sober companion when you...
Oh yeah. And, I'd get 60 days, 90 days sober and then fall off. And, the using the drugs, alcohol, everything sort of started to progress. And then I got 2 really bad DUIs and I was on academic probation, and I was just really out of my mind. And I was basically manic. And I knew that I was, for the first time, legitimately hitting bottom myself. Like, it was, the wheels were coming off the bus and it was no longer working. And that was, May 19th, 2008. And I've been able to stay sober ever since, which is not all my doing, right? There's a lot at play here, but it was the smartest decision I ever made in my life, and it probably will continue to be. And I've had amazing things happen, but that was the smartest thing. And so I share this because when I got sober and I got my life together, I finally got my undergraduate, and I thought, okay, I know programs really well. I know this life experience really well. I want to help guys. I want to do stuff, but I really want to do something where I feel like I can address areas that I was underserved, right? And, have my own thing, but really sort of address some pieces where I thought kind of fell short through my journey. And, I took some jobs that were very important. And, so, at age 25, I met my now executive director, Canon Christofferson. We were in the La Jolla community. I stayed in San Diego after I graduated. I knew I wanted to have a program here in San Diego. And we started really kicking this thing around. And we were like, hey, what did we need when we were 19 years old? What are the things that are so important at that age? And we both could really relate to each other a lot as far as, those pieces. And what we found was, there's great clinical going on. There's great adventure therapy, but this whole concept of real life coaching and launching guys and like having an accountability coach managing everything you're doing, like that was lacking for me and it was lacking for him. And so that's when we sort of decided to make the real muse and the mission of our program that sort of life coaching model.
Is that the same as an accountability coach? I wanted to hear more about that.
Well, yeah, I think, you have to have great clinical work and you have to have great adventure, but there has to be a real comprehensive coaching model, in my opinion, right? So that's sort of like a nutshell history of where I got to where I'm at today as far as what we created initially and what it's become. But that was the mission, that was the muse, the primary driver. So
now you run the grounds in Mare's house for young men and young women respectively. Do you want to talk a little bit about the distinctions that you see for young men and young women? Because you talked a little bit about your experience and what you brought to the grounds.
12, absolutely, Doug. Yeah, it's been 12, almost 13 years, and I've seen a lot change, right? There's been a lot going on. And you and I have talked about this professionally a lot, and you and I both see a lot of these shifts. For instance, the first few years, so we had the grounds first, and then we opened Mare's House, which is named after my mom 4 years ago. So the grounds was going on a solid 7-8 years prior to us opening the women's program. And those first few years, I could really relate to the core as far as the young adult men's struggles, right? And sort of their behaviors. There was a lot more pushing curfew, raising hell in the community. Okay, where's Derek? He's like 30 minutes past curfew. What's going on? Let's circle the wagons. And it was more sleepless nights and kind of more of that experience. And I can relate to that because that was the kid I was, right? I was, pushing boundaries. I was defiant. I was a nice guy and I was friendly, but I was manipulative, man. And I was going to get my way and do my thing. And I was all about just raising hell. That's what I love to do. And I would do that in a program, outside of a program. It didn't matter, right? So the shift now that we've seen I think post-COVID and just the culmination of all the things, having everything in the palm of your hand, social media, devices, the whole COVID thing, inflation, all the stuff, all the different factors here. Our job has moved from containing guys and containing the hell raising, if you will, to extracting them out of isolation and saying, right. Hey, go raise a little bit of hell, right? I mean, not literally, but it's just been this, go live some life, right? Let's get you motivated to go experience some things. And so that's been like the big shift, and you and I can really get into the weeds of that, but that's been a big change there. And I know you see that in your career as well, Doug. So.
Well, we're seeing it pervasively in the clients that we're seeing in our consulting practice, as well as in our mentoring program, these changes. We talk a lot about these shifts on this podcast. We talk about the acting in versus acting out. We talk about growing up too slow instead of growing up too fast. We talk about being risk averse instead of risk taking, and on and on. And so we're definitely seeing it. How do you see it manifesting differently with young women in Mare's house?
It's a good point. I mean, I would say generally, a lot of my young adult boys at the grounds, they, depending on what background they come from or, what their histories look like, etc., we seem to be treating a lot of similar issues, right? Meaning kind of the failure to thrive model, getting, there was histories of isolation, internet, habitual marijuana use, internet porn, gaming, sports betting. We're seeing that kind of pervasively across the board with the guys, right? And so with the women, it's definitely a lot more poly issues there. Girls have a history of disordered eating, sexual activity, self-harm, substance abuse. We're definitely doing more whack-a-mole down there, kind of addressing things. Certain things pop up, and my program director at the Mare's house, Maxine, she's phenomenal, and I can't take credit for this. These are her words, but the boys at the grounds, they need that button-down shirt press. They need to have that resume in hand. They need to look presentable. They need to have that mock interview when they go in for the job, and they've got a shot, right? The girls at Mare's house, a lot of them can get a job anywhere on their worst day. So it's not necessarily like a failure to thrive model that needs to be baked into the Mare's house program. Sure, we do have girls that need that executive functioning coaching, but really it's just a dynamic and a variety of issues that we're treating there. And it's got to be top down with just comprehensive leadership. And, my opinion is if you're running a women's program, you got to have solid women running it. That's just my opinion. So.
Absolutely. Oh, you talk a lot about this is always an important thing, and one of the things that distinguished you from others out there early on was your emphasis on working and not emphasizing academics, school, but really the importance of that. And maybe you'd like to speak to that. And I think in a lot of senses, I think work is even more important now than it was 10, 12 years ago when you opened. I think the experience of those first jobs is less and less common. The confidence to go out and do so is harder and harder when one has been isolated for so long and sort of shut up for a couple of years during COVID. And that self-confidence to go out and do that, I think, is more lacking pervasively among the younger population. So I think it's all the more important here for this population to really get that experience, that confidence and competence in that domain. So maybe speak to that a bit.
Absolutely. I mean, kind of going back to when Ken and I were creating this program, we really took a risk because we were like, okay, well, do we really want to pigeonhole ourselves and just make guys come to the grounds and have them work and make that be a requirement of the program? And we had a lot of discussions about this back and forth, and we realized, well, yeah, because if you look at their histories, a lot of them, they were on academic probation. They blew out of conventional university. A lot of the school was sort of utilized as a moratorium, right? A lot of these kids were at college and they don't even know why they were there, right? And it was, a lot of that had to do with some societal pressures or their parents or whatnot. So instead of sort of giving families and guys this flexibility to, okay, you can either do school full time or work or volunteering or a little bit of one of each, we just said, look, let's make everybody get a part-time job, and we'll do the clinical work and the adventure therapy around that. Because what we determined is, when you show up for an employer and say it's the bike rental shop, the surf shop, the coffee shop, juice bar, retail store, you are all of a sudden doing so much life skills oriented stuff. You have a schedule, you have a paycheck, you have to show up for coworkers. What do I do with this paycheck? Now I got to set up a credit union. What's a W-2? And you have to stay consistent with it, right? It's not like school where, okay, no, I'm doing good. And then transcripts come in a few months later and it's like, oh, actually you failed and you did not do well. As a program, it allows us to really track their progress and see, okay, do they still have the job? Are the paychecks coming in? But long story short, vocation teaches life skills in a way that just volunteering in school can't. And that hasn't changed since inception of what we're doing. So you're exactly right. I think more than ever now, with everything, macroly as far as automation and, just job scarcity and all these kinds of things, even that aside, showing up for a part-time job when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 is so good for you. And it doesn't define you, and it's not forever, but it gives you these building blocks and builds these small muscles. So when you do go back to college, major university or trade or whatever it is your long-term thing is, you have such a skill set and you have confidence and you have self-esteem. Right.
I think that's the real key there. Well, they're all important, of course, but foundationally, to have that experience of those successes and the perseverance and knowing that you can do that can translate into other domains. I think that's crucial.
Exactly, Doug. And we're really educating. I find myself educating parents about that a lot, right? And I talk to parents and they say, well, Alex, I don't understand. Like I'm trying to give my kids all the opportunity I can possibly get, right? As long as he's doing well at Cornell, I don't understand why he has to work at, Starbucks. Help me out here. And I said, well, how did you get to where you're at in your life, right? I think there's this big disconnect. A lot of our successful families, they had to go through such a level of resilience to get to where they're at. And then they think, okay, well, I need to shield my kid from all that suffrage, and I just want to give them the best opportunities, but they're missing the boat, because that resilience piece is what they're really going to need in order to, become successful. So I always say to some families, I say, look, I'm fine with you saying that now, and I'm going to talk this out. My hope, though, is by the time you finish this program, you're going to be asking me, well, how's my son going to afford that? And that's when we know we're doing our job, right? And we're realistic too. Parents are always going to be contributing. Our parents of our clients are going to be, contributing to their finances, their continued clinical support, tuition if they're going back to school, But if the guys and the girls can start taking over certain things like a cell phone bill, we call it the 3 F's: food, fun, and free time expenses, gym memberships, things like that, slowly, right? That's the progress that needs to happen. And it's not about working at Jamba Juice. It's about what that provides for long-term success.
And I think that's the part that really gets missed, especially in the circles that we often encounter, where as you said, there's this aspiration for whatever academic or other appearances of success might be out there, and because the young people themselves have those aspirations and don't feel the ability, that connection to a path to getting there, that's where you get into the just F it, screw it, and avoidance. Right. And substances are great with relieving some of those negative feelings around that. So this becomes preventative. It's not an inoculation, but it really bolsters the soul. I think it's important to be a contribution and not just sponging off of your parents or society. So I think it nurtures the soul as well to work.
Well, and I really try to come from a place of empathy, because when I talk to parents, it's understandably so. It's like they have this feeling of terminal uniqueness where it's like, can you believe what I'm going through? And it's like, I absolutely do. I mean, they feel like they're like, a lot of them, now there are parents that have gone through a lot of, programs and interpersonal therapy and all these things, but a lot of the parents are just, they feel like they're the only one going through it, right? And my job is to sort of normalize it and realize that, hey, this is pretty pervasive here. This is happening a lot. And what we're working on and what we're seeing with your son or daughter and these feelings and emotions that you have through this process, this is all very atypical, par for the course for us, right? So just really getting them to, take a breath and understand. And then it's like, okay, it's time to do some real work. You're going to put that script down that you've been reading from, and you're going to pick up a new one. And, I'm a firm believer, even though we have the young adult in our programs, we're treating the family system 95%, right?
Absolutely.
So here we are having this kid, and it's all about him or her, but really it's the family. And I would way rather have, let's just use a young adult like man right now. So I'd rather have a guy who's, challenging, defiant, very resistant, just a hard person to be around in my program, with parents that are totally on board,
right?
Versus a kid who comes into my program and is presenting like this rock star, and the parents are completely ambivalent and they have guilt and shame. And that's, you see what I'm saying? And I tell people that, and they're like, wow, that's surprising, because I thought, you're treating the young adult there. Don't you want to have, a lot of willingness and good behaviors? No, it all boils down to what the family is willing to do.
And not do.
Exactly. Yeah. And you and I can relate to that, right? On either
personally
spectrum.
And professionally. So, and
yeah.
All of the above. But, I think you said it earlier too, is that we also have to maintain a good deal of compassion for what the parents are going through, because they're also getting a lot of information out there from all sorts of sources that are confusing and scary, and the economics of the situation and what insurance will pay for and what gets put out there as good treatment really tends to address sort of the symptoms, and let's go do this short period of time and get you to not drink for a minute or whatever it is. And it really misses these foundational components that really help, especially a young adult, develop we've said it, but the foundational skills to navigate life successfully. You talk about this term, rock bottom. You talked about your rock bottom, but I also say that, you have to have reached the top of the developmental pyramid to have somewhere to fall back from. And if you've never had the experience of building that self-confidence, that identity, that sense of agency in the world, well, you can't just get back to it easily just because your functionality is deteriorated because of your substance abuse. You've got to build from where you left off developmentally. And for some people, that might have been 13, 14. For some people, it's, even if you've started using in your later teens, you still are missing that development. You're off by a wide margin, and it's just going to take time and the experience of these small successes in various domains to build up that sense of self-confidence and everything I've said out in the community to both. So I think that's a critical piece.
And I want to circle back to that, because there is a difference between, the 18 to 24-year-olds versus like the 25 to 30-year-olds. Right. I want to get back to that, kind of talking to parents and having the compassion. Sort of what I'm, what I mean by compassion is the things that challenge me, right? And I have to surrender my ego and my pride. For example, when I talk to parents and I have to go into a place of compassion when I really would like to just sort of, quote, reality check them. As we know, nobody ever wants to hear that unsolicited advice. The truth is I'll get things like, well, we really don't feel that the marijuana was the issue. Our son will admit that the marijuana was not the issue. We just need to do everything we can to get him back into a supportive peer group at school so he can get inspired. And that's going to fix everything.
Something external.
And right. And so for me, when I say compassion, I have to go into a place of saying, I hear that, I understand that, even though I truly feel that, like, I think the marijuana is probably the biggest elephant in the room, that could be any kind of significant drug use that's going on. But we're seeing such a prevalence of marijuana-induced psychosis now with guys.
Yeah.
And that was so not like the case at all when I was, so it's really, we've really had to pivot our programming to, sure, we get the high energy, poly drug user, meaning like a variety of different drugs that are being used that has high energy, learning disabled, slow processing. I mean, that was me, right? And we still get a lot of those guys, but it's now we're getting guys that are kind of coming out of that marijuana-induced psychosis with a flatter affect, and it's, there's so much more medication management that has to happen in collaboration with the psychiatrist. So, and that kind of goes back to, that's the post-COVID, that's one of the big shifts, right? Is that level of acuity is so prevalent now. So
we're working on putting together an episode specifically on substance-induced psychosis.
Right. Yeah. And so, kind of going back to the ages piece, I mean, a lot of people would think, well, okay, if I were to guess what's easier to work with, maybe the guy who's 25 to 30 because, he's a little bit more emotionally mature and he might have some more willingness. Nope, not at all. It's actually the 18 to 24-year-olds are easier because not only, they haven't gamed the system longer, but they also haven't gamed their parents longer, right? So those behavior patterns with the older guys, the 25 to 30-year-olds, the family enmeshment, has just gone on longer. Those behavior patterns are more entrenched, and there's just more of that going on versus sort of catching it early with an 18-year-old, for instance. And so, there's more entitlement and just a lot of different things. Sure, of course, generally the guys that are 25 to 30 aren't like screaming at girls out the window of the van. That's definitely the case, right? Like the 18 or 19-year-olds are. It's like, but as far as the emotional maturity, going back to what you're saying, so much of it is arrested, even those guys that are older, right? It's so true. You pick up where you left off. Like when I got sober, it was like, okay, I was 14, 15 again. I have to catch up my emotional maturity, right? Because I was so stunted all these years using. So it's definitely harder to treat the older young adults, I guess, the 25 to 30-year-olds, just because they've been through a lot more and the parents have been through more as well. So
it's a different life stage for sure. I can tell you that our population of adults, which is the majority of our consulting clientele at this point, has shifted from a majority being in that 18 to 24 range 5 years ago. And now our average is probably up into that, in that 25, 26, but getting clients into their 30s and even 40s now more regularly, and then into 50s and 60s at the high end. Those are outliers, but nevertheless, that average age and the types of issues they're contending with, because it's also a demoralization that comes as they're getting older and have tried many things and are further and further from their peers back from high school and college if they went to college. We're actually encountering a number of people that have completed college successfully and maybe had some speed bumps and whatnot, but managed to get through. And then sort of right around the COVID stuff, things stopped in their worlds and they never were able to get back on track. So we're getting a bunch of those too.
Well, and you guys, I mean, as far as I know, Doug, you guys are offering so much more within the local community now too, and that gives you that ability and flexibility to work with such a different variety of age ranges and different family systems and the whole thing, right? And when you got, how long ago did you guys kind of make that change as far as like working more in depth with your community?
You mean the mentoring program? We started that
the mentoring program.
10 years ago.
Is it already 10 years? Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I was going to say 6-7 years ago, but I don't know.
Oh, I just
10 years
I
ago.
want to share this, and I don't necessarily know if you remember this, but this was before I opened the grounds, and I was working for another great program, doing business development and marketing, and I came to your office and I met with you for the first time, and I talked about, the services and what we do at this program, and, it was a good visit and everything, and we stayed in touch. And then I came back and visited you again after I had opened the grounds. And this was like my first year. I was really hustling it, pounding the pavement. And I came in, I sat in your office, and I told you about what we do. And you looked at me, and it was probably one of the greatest, still to this day, one of the best compliments I've had in my career. And you said, Alex, it's so good to see you like with so much more of your shit together now, and knowing exactly like I can talk to you like a real professional, like a real peer. And I'm butchering it a little bit, but it was just like, it was the best thing I could have heard as a young professional trying to get this thing off the ground. It was just like such a win that I needed at the time. So I really feel like that should be stated, and I'm very grateful for that. So.
Well, we're all grateful to have you in the community of people helping young adults, but thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah. I mean, you know how important it is to like help guys that are coming up, and it's like, I'm not a young guy anymore. I'm turning 40 this year. These guys, some of these dudes that like, have programs and services. So I kind of took, I remember how good that felt to me at age 25, 26. And so I try to sort of emulate for some of these younger guys coming up, right? And just really saying, hey, man, you know what? Like, what you're saying is impressive to me. Like, that goes such a long way. It goes such a long way, So.
I think the young people are where the energy is. It's where the innovation is happening. It's where people are taking their own experiences and looking at how the treatment treatment industry, mental health, substance related, et cetera, has been shaping up and sort of coagulating around these just, economics driven models. And there's a lot of energy right now innovating and taking different approaches and looking at what their personal experiences can bring to the table and professionalizing that with other young people. And that affords the opportunity to have those relationships, which are so important in any treatment setting, and to engage in the community, to have those the tethers to something important in the real world, which is lacking more and more, as we all know and talk about all the time. But going forward, it's not going to get any better unless there are people, programs, innovators taking the lead and figuring out ways to provide that to people on a wider basis.
Right. I mean, so much of the world we're in now is, how are you going to be relational? How are you going to build friends? How are you going to build community? I mean, we are like beyond a precipice of this.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of Scott Galloway, and he talks about this extensively. He's got an amazing podcast, as I'm sure you know. And, I mean, just especially, with Mare's House, I'm learning so much about women and their experience in recovery. And, I've learned a ton. What I personally can relate to is obviously, as being a man, like the male experience, in programs and recovery, right? But really, it's like there's such a significant, we don't have to go deep on this, but this problem isn't going away at all for men, right? I mean, these issues that we're treating, if anything, it's getting worse. Like the level of complacency, the lack of feeling purpose, the demotivation. I mean, this was just an issue for guys that had like substance abuse and mental health issues. Now it's like, it's kind of a pervasive thing. And we've had some parents say to us, hey, you know what? I think every 18-year-old needs this program, whether they have issues or not. And I'm like, that's a great compliment. We'll take it. But I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting, I'm curious to see how this is all going to really shake out. And in the meantime, we're just going to keep just doing what we're doing, staying in our lane, you know, being the muse that we are. And and that's being said, we have had to make some adjustments and shifts. You know, I brought my clinical programming in-house this year, and I'm really proud of that. We used to work with, third-party therapists, which worked out great for us. But this was time for us to really hire our own clinical team. And it's been a significant shift for the better. You know, it's been a lot more comprehensive. And, you know, I know you and I have talked about this, Doug, quite a bit. But yeah, my point is we can make these shifts, but we can always stay true to what we're doing. And it's like navigating the moral compass while also making the necessary shifts and staying in your lane. It's really tough. So, but it's doable. So Doug, I heard this, from another great colleague of mine, and I love it. And she said to me, you know, if we all just work within the confines of what we do with integrity, we will all be provided. You know, if we all work within the confines of integrity, we'll all be provided for. And I love that, you know, because she's right. And with all the different shifts that have happened in the industry over the last, decade and a half that I've only been a part of myself, you've seen a lot more than me. It's really, I have to remember that a lot, right? And I also allow my amazing people that, work within the organization to kind of bring me back to life. Because sometimes I'll want to chase like the new flavor, right? Oh, we got to provide this. We got to offer this. We got to do this. We got to do that. And it's like, no, we don't. We work with failure to thrive young adults, and we help the unhealthy reliance of the family system, and we teach them both how to be independent. That's our muse and our mission. We don't have to be all these different things. I don't know.
And to bring integrity to that or anything else that we do, of course, we agree that's critical. And I think this goes back to the compassion we were both talking about having for the families, is that it's harder and harder for them to know whom to trust, who has that integrity in a somewhat corporatized world of treatment. And when a lot of what is happening is that the identification of the problem is being foisted on the child and less recognition of the family system and what's going on. And the families are getting a lot of mixed messages about what to do and whom to trust. And I think that's part of where they're confused and where things can stay chaotic, because they hear a lot of people who speak with, approximations of integrity out there. But I think that this is where I have such compassion for parents and their vulnerability when they're having to tread through something like this with their loved one.
Me too. And rarely now do we have a parent who reaches out to us where this is their first go around.
Right.
And that was so common. I mean, it was so common, 7-8 years ago. At least it was half and half. Half the parents, this was their first time going down this road. The other half, they've dealt with it before in some capacity. Nowadays, they've been going through it. Well,
that's probably a good place for me to pitch our consulting work, because that's really what my primary role has been for 30 something years, is helping guide families through exactly that process so we can get to the right factors early and minimize the chances of having to repeat through that revolving door of programs and really attend to the full range of issues from an outside professional perspective. That's why we like to architect that plan with them. There's my shameless plug for this episode.
Right. And you know what? People need to hear that. That was great. I think people need to hear that, you and I have worked with a couple families and when they do well with us and they return back to the Bay Area, I'm just thinking of one in particular, how perfect that complementary, continued support was, right? Because it just fit
with the mentoring
right there.
You mean with the mentoring?
That's what I'm saying.
Part.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
So, it's needed, man. It's needed. And we do need to do stuff more on a community level, even though like most of my families come from out of state and different programs.
Well, the conversation is happening. You referenced Scott Galloway, and we listen. We're devotees of Jonathan Haidt around here, and there's people who are starting to talk more and more about the pervasive problems of isolation and despair among young people, and especially now how it's affecting those who are a little bit more at risk and more vulnerable. And I think there's going to be more and more awareness of the importance of getting out, having those physical experiences in the real world, getting off the devices, and having the community connection. And so I'm looking forward to that as we evolve. What we have to do in response, it's only out of integrity that we have to respond and adapt differently to what's presenting to us as the care providers.
Right. It is going to implode on itself in some form. Like, we know technology is here to stay, obviously, but it's not this kind of thing where we're just going to throw our hands up and be like, well, this is just the world they're living in now. It's like, no, we're all going to really see sort of the blowback of, and we already are. But I think on like a more global scale, it's like people are going to have to get so serious about curbing their device usage. They're going to have to get so serious about, finding time that is, not connected to something, and really just being able to feel inspired by, whether it's something as simple as just like going for a walk in the park, or doing something as radical as like surfing and mountain climbing, things like that. There's going to be a tipping point with this. I know there is. We already have the awareness of how it's so important to unplug and really just, utilize tools to curb your own usage of I look at it every day on my phone. It's like, well, you were on for 3 hours today. And it's just like, it's just like such a shame, it's kind of like, but it reminds me of, on the pack of cigarettes where it says like, this causes cancer, or sometimes they'll have like a horrible sticker there of like a diseased lung. Right. But hey, I'm still going to light one up after, that's not going to stop me. Right. And that's kind of what's going on with the usage of the monitoring on the devices. But I don't know. It's going to shake out. It's not just going to keep pervasively going in this one direction, my personal opinion. So
I hope there is some shakeout with it, because I do, and I want to say for the record, because I do think we're going towards a AI model, that I do welcome our AI robot overlords when they do come. These podcasts last forever out there, so I want to be clear. But in all seriousness, it's a problem that I think is getting greater recognition, and I part of this podcast too is a call to action for people to do something about it, to act out of integrity and out of their passion for working with young people to help them, to assist them. And this is why I love what you brought to this when I first met you, and what you've continued to do and evolve at the grounds.
Right. I mean, just think real quick, we have our personal, Doug, you and I send pictures of like, we're both into off-roading and overlanding. We're both very passionate about that. We send each other pictures of, tricked out Jeeps and Toyotas and things like that. And we're laughing, and it's goofy and it's funny, but really it's like, could you imagine not having that? Was like, no. And so many of our young people just like they're just doom scrolling, doom scrolling. Right. And it's just like, I hope it's just bringing the inspiration back, right? And getting inspired,
On that note, Alex Zemeckis, it's been a pleasure having you with us, as I knew it would be, on The Reframe, and take care.
Doug, this was a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Reframe. Follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts, so you'll never miss an episode. Please share this episode with your friends, colleagues, innovators in the industry, and anyone you feel would benefit from listening. To learn more about the Bowden Group and Bowden Mentoring, and find additional resources, connect with us at www.thebowdengroup.com.